everything is still on fire. I remember when I first heard that line in the poem by Reverend Soto, and it seared my heart in its clarity and truth. Everything is still on fire. We are bone tired with this latest surge of the pandemic. We are heartsick at 200-mile hurricane swaths and the horrifying fires that raged in late December. We are spirit weary as our democracy teeters and our work for racial justice, blessed and beloved community, feels more like being on a treadmill than on a path, a rehashing rather than revolutionary. Everything is still on fire, despite our best efforts, and it is clear that fire or not, we must level up in what it means to thrive. That's what the poet writes. As I prepared to preach this Sunday before Martin Luther King Jr.'s holiday, I found myself asking Ancestor King, what does it mean to level up? I use the title Ancestor as a way to evoke and embed the wisdom of those who have died to guide my life and the life of the communities I serve. Ancestor King, what does it mean to level up? What does it mean to take our place as a people of faith who fall short and know where we flourish and where we still need to reach? In one of Dr. King's lesser-known speeches, his speech entitled Beyond Vietnam, King levels up. It's a speech rarely quoted, and I know why. It is powerful, and it is unflinching. Nobody wanted him to go there. Nobody wanted him to talk about the Vietnam War and what it was costing. Certainly not the government. Certainly not civil rights activists who thought it would dilute his message of racial justice and equality. No one wanted him to call out the glaring evils and hypocrisy of that war and what it was doing to black, brown, and white soldiers as our nation forced them into a brutalizing process. Nobody wanted him to go there. Nobody wanted him to parse out the history leading up to the Vietnam War and make an argument for why the Viet Cong and Ho Chi Minh had responded to our aggression with their own. Nobody wanted him to actually live out the true meaning and value of compassion and nonviolence. That is, as Dr. King states, when it helps us to see the enemy's point of view, to hear his questions, to know his assessment of ourselves, so that we may learn and grow and profit from the wisdom of the brothers who are called the opposition. End quote. Nobody wanted him to go there, but he did. And then he leveled up. He stops himself about 3/4 of the way through the speech and says, it's tempting to stop here. It's seductively tempting to stop. But he doesn't stop there. We don't quote this speech because at the end, Ancestor King calls us all to take on a true revolution of values. He states, we must rapidly begin the shift from a thing-oriented society to a people-oriented society. And then he makes a prophecy. When machines and computers, profit motives, and property rights are considered more important than people, the giant triplets of racism extreme materialism and militarism are incapable of being conquered, end quote. Everything is still on fire, Dr. King. That revolution of values seems almost impossible now, and the giant triplets seem to be winning. One of the most important books I've read over the course of this god-awful pandemic has been Heather McGhee's The Sum of Us: What Racism Costs Everyone and How We Can Prosper Together. McGhee is a Black policy wonk in economics and social frameworks. With incredible empathy and clarity, she analyzes how we as a nation have come to this place of such deep division and destruction, materially rich and spiritually poor and vastly, vastly unequal. She, like King, wants a revolution of values where we shift to a people-oriented society, where we shift into an abundance found in solidarity, where everyone has enough, where everyone lives into their full humanity, where we cherish the variety and gifts of the multitudes of human culture and expression. And the only way that we can do this, she says, is if we take on a deeply held and tragically flawed American belief. The belief we have in the zero-sum game. And what does that mean, the zero-sum game? It means I win only if you lose. And if you win, then I most certainly will have to lose. Something surely will have to be taken from me in order for you to win. Historically, she explains, the zero-sum game emerges alongside the construct of race and racism in the early days of the colonies. As many of us know, white European landowners and enslavers consciously worked on the classification of people based on skin color, religion, culture, and geography, to rank people in order to take their land and their labor. What the gentry class didn't expect was the cross-cultural uprisings that began to spring up all over the colonies, where the European indentured class and the enslaved Africans joined together in common cause. It is at this point that the powerful got really nervous and diabolically creative. In essence, they began to create levels of freedom based on skin tone. Most of the European newcomers to the colonies were people at the bottom of the social hierarchy in their home countries. They were orphans, people from debtors' prisons or the poorhouse. Looking through the colonial laws of the early 1700s, you can see deliberate hierarchies of freedoms being constructed between poor whites and, as McGhee puts it, quote, the uncivil, unchristian, and above all, unwhite populations, end quote. She continues, many of the laws oppressing workers of color did so to the direct benefit of poor whites, creating a zero-sum relationship between these two parts of the colonial underclass. It was the embedding of the zero-sum game in our country's DNA. I win when you lose. And it allowed the powerful to convince the populace that the inverse was also true. I lose when you win. As McGhee writes, the zero-sum game made it easy for the powerful to sell the idea that liberation or justice for people of color would necessarily require taking something away from white people. This emerging paradigm of the zero-sum game worked perfectly to divide people then, and it works perfectly to divide people now. When 2/3 of the insurrectionists on January 6th were interviewed and asked why they stormed the Capitol, the most common answer, after the big lie, was the fear of the Great Replacement. That is, the fear that the rights of Black and brown folks are outpacing the rights of whites, that if someone gets more, then someone else must get less. The zero-sum game has done a slow burn through our country, flaring up and being tamped down only to flare up again like a ravenous fire, eating and consuming all manner of policies and initiatives that would have helped everyone, but lie in a pile of cinders because white folk in particular have bought the lie constructed centuries ago that if you get something, something will be taken away from me. This is how public goods, from parks to functioning schools, have become private luxuries, how unions have collapsed and universal health care is deemed out of reach, while zillionaires launch themselves into space. McGee writes, "We must recognize that we have reached the productive and moral limit of the zero-sum game." That is the first step. So what is the next? What is our response as a people of faith? How do we take on a true revolution of values? How do we shift to a person-oriented society where all people have enough? Dr. King and Heather McGee are clear. We must practice solidarity. Solidarity must be our new game plan and the best option for defense against racism, extreme materialism, and militarism. Solidarity is not charity work. It does not mean volunteering at a food shelf or at the Goodwill, although those things are very important, and I participate in that kind of work as part of my expression of faith. But charity work is not solidarity. Solidarity means a communion of interests, and responsibilities, a mutuality of support and care. Solidarity means different cultures coming together, not just coexisting, but thriving through their differences. Solidarity means living in the clear, cold truth that we need each other. When I think about my personal experience of dropping the zero-sum game head warp and living into the solidarity of abundance, the first thing that comes to my mind is making music with other people. I've been in plenty of bands over the course of my lifetime, and one thing I can say for sure is nobody likes to play in a band that is rife with competition and rivalries, a band that revolves around winning and losing, competitive solos, and stingy music making. Not only does it feel terrible, it usually sounds terrible too. Music in its abundance and beauty comes about when musicians support and care for one another on and off the stage. The best bands I've played in have been the ones where I felt loved, and I loved the musicians I was playing with. where there was a sense of making room for the best of one another's talents, the best of our cultures and contexts, of being vocal about our support for one another, and getting out of the way and truly inviting that self-expending, other-affirming, community-forming power that I sometimes call God, and I also call music. When this church passed a resolution in 2019 to commit itself to racial justice and equity for every person, you decided to live into a call of solidarity within these walls and beyond these walls. You wrote, "We commit to this work of love and justice so that all souls may grow in harmony with the divine." You wrote, "We commit to acting with courage as we work to change the impact of race, racism, and whiteness on individual and institutional structures and experiences." You wrote, "We commit to pursue understandings of white privilege and white supremacy and how their existence impacts the First Unitarian Church of Dallas, our city, our state, our nation, our world." That's a way to begin, my friends. That's a way to begin in solidarity. This is how we drop the zero-sum game head warp and begin to live into a revolution of values. This is how we begin to shift from a material-oriented society to a people-oriented society, to a people-oriented church. I'm sorry that everything is still on fire, Reverend Soto writes. And I say to you now, in all sincerity, I am sorry that everything is still on fire. Once hate catches, the winds of not my problem blow, and the blaze is hard to stop. But hard is not impossible. Not yet is different than never. And the poem continues, you in community have an answer. You in solidarity have a response to systems of power and control and to the cost of suffering. You and your community together are the answer. You're not only a people of the flame, you also are a people of cold, clear truth. You know both where you fall short and where you flourish, where you still reach. Everything is still on fire, but all is not lost. You remain more nimble than steadfast, more unshakable than swayed by the latest rage. You are here to put out the ravenous flames and heal the world. Enough is enough. May we take our place in solidarity and cherish this central value that you have undertaken. May it be so, and amen.